Dr. Ghislaine Boulanger. She is a psychologist and psychoanalyst in private practice in New York City and a member of the relational faculty at New York University's postdoctoral program in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. She is on the editorial boards of the International Journal for Applied Psychoanalytic Studies and Vision Review. Since the publication of her book, Wounded by Reality, Understanding and Treating Adult Onset Trauma, she has taught and published extensively on the psychodynamic dilemmas facing adults who have survived violent and life-threatening events. In 2006, when the American Psychiatric Association officially withdrew their support from Guantanamo Bay, the American Psychological Association announced that psychologists would remain helping military interrogators to combat terrorism. At that point, Dr. Boulanger and a group of colleagues began to mobilize psychologists against APA policy, urging them to withhold their dues. Their organization, Psychologists for an Ethical APA, proposed the 2008 referendum banning psychologists from working in settings that were in violation of international law or the U.S. Constitution. The referendum was adopted by a wide margin of APA members, but as we now know from the Hoffman report, the APA actively blocked its implementation. Dr. Karen Lombardi is a professor, Derner Institute of Advanced Psychological Studies at Delphi University. She is formal faculty and supervisor, postdoctoral program in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy, Derner Institute, and formal faculty and supervisor, Northwest Center for Psychoanalysis. Author of books, articles, and book chapters on psychoanalytic theory, childhood subjectivity, and the intersection of psychoanalysis and cultural issues. She has a private practice in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy on Long Island, where she sees adults, children, and couples. Saren Levy, I knew I was going to do that, is a fourth-year doctoral student at the Derner Institute of Advanced Psychological Studies at Delphi University. She is actively engaged in psychotherapy process and outcome research and has presented and published related works. She is the recipient of the 2015 George Stryker Fellowship, awarded in recognition of outstanding research productivity and ability. Additionally, Saren is a practicing psychotherapy trainee. She currently works as a group and individual therapist at the Derner Community Clinic and at the Brooklyn VA. She has served as a peer psychodiagnostic testing TA and supervisor, as a doctoral student representative on Adelphi's curriculum committee, and as an active member of the Society for Psychotherapy Research and the Eastern Group Psychotherapy Society. Dennis Higgins is a second-year clinical psychology doctoral student at Adelphi University. Prior to his study of psychology, he served 9 years as a paratrooper in the United States Army, deploying 7 times to Iraq and Afghanistan and achieving the rank of staff sergeant. He served as an interrogator for Joint Special Operations Command in both Afghanistan and Iraq. In Afghanistan, he also served as Human Intelligence Liaison for Task Force 10, part of the International Security Assistant Forces Special Operations Forces. In Iraq, he has served as a senior interrogator for Combined Joint Special Operations Task Force, Arabian Peninsula, and the lead interrogation advisor for the Special Operations Iraqi Transition Team. In addition to his bachelor's degree from East Stroudsburg, University of Pennsylvania, he also graduated from the Defense Language Institute with a diploma in Serbian and Croatian language. He is currently a psychology extern at the South St. Albans VA Community Living Center in Queens, New York. And now, Dr. Boulanger.
Thank you. Just to say to you guys who put this together, thank you for digesting the report and making it, I hope you're going to make it available to us. That would be great. And Jean, I admire your patience in working with that bureaucracy. I'm going to talk about the protest that I got involved in. But I think I was, actually, how long do I have to talk?
15 minutes, 20,
Oh, okay.
whatever we just
This
did.
has changed?
Yes. Yes.
All right, I'll do 15. I might take 20. That put me off my stroke. Okay, let's recalibrate. Yes, you asked me to talk about what happened when I first saw the report. I think you gave us a paragraph about what we might address. And I mean, if you've ever been accused, as I have in the last, let me see, we started this in 2006, so in the last 10 years, of being paranoid, a conspiracy theorist, a troublemaker, having problems with authority, not smart enough to grasp the real facts, and then your husband reads the Hoffman report to you, following you from room to room, you think, good God, I actually wasn't paranoid enough. I actually really underemphasized what was going on. My conspiracy theories just broke off somewhere. So look, how did I become involved? When you were reporting on the Hoffman report, you talked about that really, I think, a really crucial moment in June of 2006, when the psychiatrists withdrew from Guantanamo. What had happened was that the president of the American Psychiatric Association had gone to Guantanamo, and unlike Levant and the other people who'd gone who were psychologists, he said, no, I do not like what I'm seeing here. He did not consider it, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be sometimes quite prejudiced, and I shouldn't. He didn't consider it a PR junket. And he was appalled. And he said, we're getting out. And at that point, then he made this announcement, and the DOD made this announcement that psychologists would be the people who were providing mental health services in Guantanamo. And I thought, well, there's something. Firstly, most of us who are trained as psychologists think we train. Somehow it comes to us with the courses that we're superior to psychiatrists for whatever reason. Our training goes into more detail of what this, that, and the other. They only give medication. And I thought, my God, this is really embarrassing. I mean, we don't know what's going on in Guantanamo. We're very, very concerned about what we hear from the Bush administration and things that are leaking out now by torture. And now the psychologists are going to be, and the word that I used at the time was collaborating. And I'll accept colluding. And I went on, I was on a number of listservs, and I said, look, I'm going to withhold my dues. Like anybody gives a shit, honestly, about $200 worth of dues or whatever I was paying, maybe a bit more. But what was very interesting to me was that even on the more psychoanalysis of social responsibility list, I think it was, oh, you don't want to do that, no. And I started to feel quite shamed. And shaming is a very important part of protest and being confronted with the steps that you will take. And also, I want to say that when you have an authoritarian regime, a totalitarian regime, and maybe I'm going over the line here to say the Bush's regime, but when you have the Patriot Act and you start to lose your civil rights, people start to feel very uncomfortable. And they start not to feel a whole lot of trust. And you can shame people into sort of backing off. And I can't say I put these ideas all together at the time. But I thought, I mean, I was ashamed. We are all easily shamed. And I thought, well, I'm not going to put my ideas out here because I don't want people to tell me that I'm doing a bad thing and not supporting the APA. So with not the world's best technological skills, I started my own listserv. And I then went to other listservs that I knew about. It was called Withhold APA Dues. And I went to other listservs that I knew about. And that I was on, and said, if you want to join us. And at the same time, I said, oh my God, this is overwhelming. I cannot do this alone. And my first important message to you, if you decide to protest something, is find colleagues who will work with you. In fact, we have a psychologist, a colleague of mine from, before even Steve, there are so many Stevens in this world. Before Stephen Reisner and Stephen Sauls got involved, there was, before they got involved, there was another psychoanalyst who was involved, and he was trying to fight this alone. He lost. He got consistently screwed, actually, lied to, as we now know, unfortunately, by Becky. And he gave up. And firstly, I think that's humiliating to be put in that position. But secondly, I felt it was so important to have colleagues. And so we had a steering committee of at first 4 and then 8 of us. And we kept this, it was a very small listserv at first. And of interest, I think, was that of the first 30 people, and I was able for a while to keep tabs on who was on there, I lost such a clear idea. But of the first 30 people, 25 of us were either immigrants or gay, or leading some other kind of alternative lifestyle. And I think that tells you something about, you know something about being in the margins. And you say, okay, well, I can survive that, so I'll do it anyway. Not a conscious choice. One of the purposes that I had in doing this again was to feel that I wasn't just writing angry letters to Dr. Anderson, who was the president of the APA, or to Steve Benke, or Anderson, the CEO, right? To Anderson, or to Kuchar, who was at that time president. But, I mean, because, you know, look, we're all literate. You don't get a PhD and not be literate. So everybody's kind of showing off, this is what I said to Kuchar, this is what I said to Benke. Well, yeah, but what's that going to do? And also Kuchar wrote back to one of my friends who wrote to him and said, Dr. Kuchar, Kuchar was at that point the president of the APA. Dr. Kuchar, I wrote to you last week, and I haven't gotten a response. And Kuchar, in very presidential tones, said, don't hold your breath. Kind of astonishing.
You have to know Kuchar.
Yeah. So, the purpose of withholdings at that point was, if you withhold your dues, you say, okay, but it's kind of a passive way of making your feelings felt. But we also provided a community across the country, and we ended up, and I'll say perhaps a little bit more about this, also in Europe and beyond, depending on where you think Turkey falls at once, to support people who were in communities where their voices, where they really had no one else protecting them. Interestingly, Northern California, Michigan, I can't remember other places, but there were places where the Psychological Association in that state was very, very much against our protest. And we also wanted people to know what people were doing in other venues. Come 2007, the meetings took place, the APA meetings took place in San Francisco. And I thought, oh my God, a perfect storm. Summer in San Francisco, what a better place to hold a demonstration. And we held a very big demonstration. And I will say that I didn't think it was as well attended as it could have been. But we got fantastic news coverage across the world. And that, one of the things that we became very aware of at that point was that the APA does not do well with public embarrassment. And I think that this is where James Risen's book, to skip forward all the way to 2014, and when Risen's book was published, and it was not, and the APA dismissed it out of hand, but then there was more stuff in the press about it until they had to take notice. So that was an exciting moment. And at those meetings, a young man came up to me and said, look, I'm on your listserv, and I have a way of getting around the APA bureaucracy so that we can bring a referendum to the members to argue that psychologists should not be working in Guantanamo Bay. And I said, do it. And we put together a little task force for him to work on this. And this was the 2008 referendum. I feel gratified and pissed that in 2015, finally, that referendum was, with somewhat changed wording, finally got onto the books. But do all of you know what I mean when I talk about the referendum? Did any of you have a chance to vote for it? Because as you know, we carried it by 20 points, which was a massive margin in the APA.
That was that was largely what the 2015 resolution came out of that.
That's right.
That's right. You know, it got revised, and then in 2015, following the Hoffman, so that if you read the resolution, you'll see that, you know, it has all those elements.
That's right, exactly. But what was interesting, and had I, you know, when people are telling you you're paranoid or you have problems with authority, my age is silly, but anyway, or whatever, you do start to think, my God, maybe they're right. You know, and I'm always differ to Stephen Salz and Stephen Reisner in this, and of course I knew what Stevens was saying. By now I was also getting a lot of behind the scenes information from a man called Natty Raymond, whom I might mention again, who was a human rights investigator for physicians for human rights. So I really did know that there was fire here. It wasn't just that there was smoke. But it became so clear that our referendum, that was such a triumph, not just for us, but for the whole profession of psychology, it seemed, that this referendum was just not being implemented. And we watched the ways in which Benke would say, oh, well, it's not really in violation of, you know, what do you mean prisons that are in violation of the US Constitution? It's not really in violation of the US Constitution. It's not really in violation of international human rights law, the ways in which it was defined, in fact. But now, if you read the Hoffman report, you see the emails between Benke and the Department of Defense talking about how to get around this referendum. And even from the start, when they got wind of it, they were how not to even let it go to the vote, how to prevent that. Then the next thing went to the vote. Okay, so how are we not going to do it? I should say that listserv continues to this day. It gets hacked. It used to. I don't think it does anymore. But it got hacked into every now and then we would have ladies trying to interest various guys doing whatever they wanted to do, and it was really a pain while this happened. But when would it happen? It happened. There was one of the ethics suits that was brought against a man called John Lesso, and when the Benke was going to hand down the ruling on Lesso, which was that he'd done nothing wrong, which was of course ridiculous, as again Hoffman was able to substantiate. Suddenly our listserv gets hacked into. We can't use it for it. And the guy who wrote the referendum and I are frantically trying to ban everybody and start it up again. Even if we're in a very reduced way. Last summer, actually just before the Hoffman report was published, Benke was very, very popular in Europe. Very popular. And he always went every summer to I think it's the World Psychotherapy Congress or something, and would lecture on ethics. And this year, we mounted another big campaign. We wrote something on our listserv, and then we went to other people's listservs, and we got many, many signatures. And actually, I will say that this World Psychotherapy Forum, disinvited Benke. However, they did invite his second in command, who continues at the APA to this day, and that's something I might say a little bit more about. So, I mean, I will say about this protest that it has felt incredibly worthwhile. It has taken an enormous amount of time. There was one man who said I was only withholding my tears because I couldn't afford to pay them. as you can imagine, it also takes an awful lot of both time, money, to the extent that time is money there too, to do this, and it has been absolutely worthwhile. It's given me the best colleagues of my life, and I think it's also clarified my moral compass. And so I'm going to say a little bit more about that, because one of the other questions was, how should clinicians respond? Jean will know this well. Benke had he's a very likable, personable man. I could see how people could be confused by him. And he had this way of standing up before any group of people, whether it's this small or enormous, and saying, this, going back and forth, this is a subject on which reasonable people can reasonably disagree. No, it isn't. Recently, Ken Pope. Do you know who Ken Pope is? Ken Pope, who it was ethics chair, which means he wasn't a member of APA's staff. He was an APA member, but he was the chair of the ethics committee in the 90s. He's recently written a really worthwhile article, and it's about the difference between what he calls guild ethics and professional ethics. You seen it?
Is it the one with the morally oblique, or ethics codes morally oblique, or something?
No,
Okay,
no.
Okay.
But you can, if you go to Ken Pope online, or if you email me, I'll give you a direct connection to it. And what he says is that guild ethics really dodge accountability. 102 was a guild ethic. 102 that said that if you are ordered to do what you should, the Nuremberg defense, okay, if you are ordered by a superior, you do it. Guild ethics are cutting your ass. They're not about the public. They're putting the members' interests above the public interest. And their APA has been led by guild ethics for at least 25 years. And this has to change. Jean, you said something that really interested me. Because this whole question about whether, and I want to go back to this question of interrogations here. Because is it really true? Is this what the DoD was saying when they insisted on saying that our interrogations have to be legal, safe, legal, ethical, and effective? That they wanted to include that word effective because and then that becomes the stumbling point. Because in fact, is it really true? And I'd be interested to hear this. If an interrogation cannot be both ethical and effective. I think that's a big question for the APA to answer, for people to answer.
Could you clarify what you mean? I'm not sure I understand.
Well, you said,
yes.
Right, so it would seem to me that if we really need to get information from someone, can we do it in such a way that we don't go beyond our ethics and harm them?
No, I think the issue or the reason for those 4 words is that as a psychologist, that you can participate in an interrogation, provided to do those 4 things. The issue at hand is, this is the difference between the safety monitor, which is with in the interrogation room to make sure it's safe, that it's legal and it's ethical. But if you're also in the room to make sure it's effective, that it works, that's a conflict, inherently a conflict for one person to do both things. And if you work for the Department of Defense, or if you're in the military, and you're in the room, in the interrogation, because you work for the government whose role is to do the interrogation, can you ethically do both? Or can, even if you say you're only being there to be a safety monitor, your organizational loyalty is that you work for the government. So can you be there as a safety monitor? That's the issue.
Well, I hear you. I'm not certain that I'm prepared to split the hairs in quite that
Yeah, I
way.
think your question had more to do with whether effective interrogation techniques were ever ethical.
Is that what
that's
Or can be,
something
yeah,
to
or
think
can,
about?
well, or can be.
Can be, right.
Because that becomes a real issue for, I don't know whether you want to have this
Yeah,
conversation
maybe
now
we
or
should.
later.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
let
that's
the
like
Senate,
the-
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I think I've probably said what I have to say. That you asked at some point, I think the last question that you asked is about personal and how is it affected us personally and professionally. I cannot make that distinction. For me, personal and professional have become the same. Maybe it's as a part of this work that they've become the same. Maybe it's as becoming clearer in my mind about human rights and the violation of human rights. But there is a wonderful psychoanalyst, I mean, those of you who have taken some psychodynamic courses know his work, Thomas Ogden. And Ogden published a paper in 2005 talking about what I would not part with. And he's talking about what I would not part with when I go into the room as a psychoanalyst. And I have to say that I do not part with, and he says exactly the same thing, my sense of human rights law and where I don't leave the socio-political outside the door. And again, that has been reinforced by this work that I've undertaken in the last 10 or so years. So,
Thank you.
what more to say?
Thank you so much. Dr. Lombardi?
Okay, well, this is a personal account and not an organizational account. And I don't want it to appear as if I'm totally anti-organizations, although I may be anti-APA. I think that there are lots of opportunities for people to organize and to do things, but this is a personal account because actually it sort of came out of one of my students coming up to me and saying, "Did you read the Hoffman report? Do you know what's going on?" And I said, "I haven't been a member of APA in 10 years. Of course I know what's going on, but I haven't read the Hoffman report." So he then forwarded it to me, and that's how this sort of dialogue began. But I terminated my membership with APA, and I don't remember exactly, it was either 2004 or 2005. So that's 10 years before the Hoffman report. Because, as Jean said, this was not secret. This was not secret. We were all aware of collusion, not collaboration, but collusion, because it was publicized in the New York Times, in the APA Monitor. I would get newsletters that would talk about this. We knew about this all along. So I have very little tolerance for these sorts of things, so I quit. Okay. Okay, so there were reports that APA was colluding with the government on torture techniques in the New York Times and in newsletters sent out by the organization itself. And I think, the thing that stands out in my mind actually is the report on Martin Seligman's meetings. And that was what really spurred me to quit, which I'll get to later. And we had to read between the lines a little bit, but it was obvious that Seligman and others were meeting with government agencies, that their research was being applied to extract confessions from presumed terrorists, and it was public information that the organization itself sent out to everybody. Okay. So in 2014, after the Hoffman report, I had informal discussions with some of my students about my own actions regarding APA. And I did, as I've already said, maintain that we knew what was going on all along. If not in detail, at least in general substance. as the APA itself was quite open about this. So as, particularly as psychoanalysts and psychotherapists, many of us have felt for a very long time that the APA doesn't represent our interests. That their push, for example, for managed care and time-limited behavioral interventions already indicates an outside collaborations that do not serve the best interests of patients or psychologists. And, you know, it's a very diverse organization, and it's full of people who do research and get government monies for research, and people who teach, and so psychotherapists are a fairly small part of the organization, so you need to know that, but many of us feel like APA has never really represented us very strongly. I think that many of us can respect the differences in positions, ethical, political, professional positions between researchers and therapists, or among therapists of different orientations. But the Hoffman report for many people was a tipping point. And actually, since you asked me to be on this panel, I've received communications from Division 39. I remained a member of Division 39 once I realized I could quit APA and still be a member of Division 39. So I'm still involved in the organization on that level. And anyway, I received an email asking us to rejoin the APA or to resist resigning if we hadn't resigned yet for one more year, in the hopes that that other voices might exert influence. And I want to quote from the email that I got. This was just last month. Our current view is that there is potential for real change in APA at this moment in history, but that this change will require ongoing pressure from the very psychologists who are thinking of resigning or who have already left. The letter goes on to name people who have resigned and are returning to try to exert pressure on the organization. The authors of the letter, including Stephen Schultz and G. Maria Rico, both of whom contributed documents of a critical nature to the Hoffman report, recognize that change is not guaranteed, as they point to reactionary forces within the organization that continue to exert power. Here's their quote. I love this quote for a reason that I'll tell you in a second. There has been concerted pushback from a small minority who were happy with the APA's prior loose ethical standards. Now, there's a misprint in that sentence, and they wrote, it's a Freudian slip, they wrote L-O-S-E, lose, for loose. Did you see that? L-O-O-S-E.
Yeah.
And their misspelling speaks the truth. We did lose our ethical standards. They were not simply loose. So you see this typo, there it is, okay. They speak for themselves. Thank the unconscious, right? They further acknowledge that the APA has so far made only baby steps. This is quoting them again, only baby steps toward the organizational reckoning, internal reforms, and accountability processes needed to restore the association to its members and away from the entrenched minority who either participated in the decade of collusion or ignored the warning signs. Okay. So, for me, there's something inherently abhorrent about violating our ethical guidelines, particularly do no harm, revising them to fit with and please the Department of Defense, and further, deporting those weakened ethics to Guantanamo and other foreign shores so as not have to comply with any ethical concerns, not the Geneva Convention, not the Hippocratic Oath, not the reworked APA ethical principles. And I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Rendition, but if you have, you can get some sense of the uses of deportation. I could see these violations as here comes my cynicism, okay? I can see these violations as just another instance of bureaucratic corruption in the pursuit of power. What's new? It happens in all big organizations, right? So some APA mocker wanted to cozy up to the government and curry favor and make some money and get some power. And what's ethics when there's the siren call of power, narcissism, or whatever? So that's my cynicism. So I wasn't surprised. That didn't mean I wasn't horrified. What really horrified me initially was to see that widely cited and accepted research, particularly Seligman's research, bent to the use of torture. It was Seligman that got me. Of course, the bureaucracy I don't expect much from, but Seligman got me. Of course, I knew about Seligman's collaboration before I knew the details of the larger and more important collaboration of the organization on an institutional level, which is far worse. But it was Seligman that got me. So that was enough for me, that kind of bending his research to perverse means. And that's when I was done with APA. And what I found subsequently, in terms of the organizational level, was far more horrifying. But my initial and more personal reaction was a sense of betrayal. That Seligman had betrayed me, the field of psychology had betrayed me by using research and bending it to perverse means. So before I became a psychologist, I had entertained the possibility for a couple of years, actually for several years, of being a lawyer. And my adolescent platform, by the way, I would have hated it. So, my adolescent platform was frequent arguments with my father, who would disagree strenuously with my positions, try to pull out all of this kind of oppositionality, and then brag to other people that I should become a lawyer. When I was first married, my husband was a second-year law student at Columbia, and he invited me to his classes because I was still thinking maybe I would do this. He invited me to his classes. Well, that was an eye-opener because I discovered that law school had nothing to do with ethics or justice. It had to do with the law, and I had not made that distinction previously. So that was the end of law school for me. But we can examine the functioning of the Penn's task force in those terms as a prime example of the law versus justice. In the first place, the Penn's task force, I have slightly different numbers than you. I had that there were 10 members and only 4 of them were non-military. You said 3 and 9, but
Well, the
whatever
chair
it is,
doesn't
it's
vote.
like that.
The chair doesn't
It's-
vote, that's why it said
Oh, the chair
6-3.
doesn't vote, okay,
Yeah, but
all
she
right,
was
so 10 and
non-voting.
9,
Yeah. Yeah.
10 and 4, 6 and 4 is what I have. Because I included the chair, I guess. Okay, but anyway, it was highly weighted, whatever numbers you use, towards the military, because the minority of members were now military and the majority of members were military. And the DOT psychologists maintained the position that United States military law trumped ethical principles of psychology, as well as the Geneva Convention, which I believe ensured the failure of Penn's as a critical voice. Wessels, Arrigo, and Thomas all came to regret going along with the Penn's final report. Thomas, who was a psychoanalyst on the panel, wrote soon after the Penn's report was issued that it saddened her that the report did not hold psychologists to a more stringent standard. When interviewed for the Hoffman report, both she and Arrigo spoke of being overpowered by what they called groupthink, and by the predominance of men on the committee. These were 2 women. So I understand from reading an article in the current issue of the National Psychologist, which again just came out a couple of weeks ago, that Division 19, the Society for Military Psychologists, objects to the Hoffman report on the basis that its criticism of some military psychologists is politically biased. I also understand that the ethics of the military are different from the ethics that guide us as psychologists, and maybe they have to be. I don't know, I'd have to think about that, but maybe they have to be. It is this issue that requires our attention regardless of our politics. It also bears repeating, to quote the Hoffman report, that the federal government, particularly the VA and research monies from the DoD, is the single largest employer of psychologists, which in itself might be thought to qualify as political influence. As an organization, are we guided by self-interest or by our ethics? By self-interest or the interests of our patients and the interests of the greater good? As a traditionally conservative organization, these are the questions the APA should be asking itself, and these are the questions we should be asking ourselves as psychologists.
Thank you. Saren? Well, thanks for having me. I'll preface this by saying I'm kind of in awe of all of the panelists I'm sitting here with and feeling kind of ill-equipped to compete with what's been said, and torn about where to go with this. I have a lot less experience and awareness of all of these issues. I feel like, I know Laura had said that I think I'm here because I'm a bit of a loudmouth. We had a conference and I was talking about organizational shifts and means of really changing, implementing positive change internally. So by joining the APA, by being active and implementing change, things could shift in a positive direction. But I've not practiced what I've preached there. I did not renew my membership. So I guess I can reflect loosely on some of my associations here, some of my reactions, and hopefully that'll suffice. I think a big reaction I have to all of this is this seems kind of beyond the scope of an ethical code that wasn't tightened up enough, and speaks to a much larger cultural issue and systemic issue. That really scares me. There's a culture that allowed this to happen. The fact that we need a code that's tightened to stop this from happening is pretty disturbing. And I feel like there are all these ways in our profession that we're negotiating how to do our best against larger systems. I feel that tension in hospitals, definitely. There's managed care. You're in there. What are you going to do in, the 2-week window you have with someone? Very little. You can do the best you can, but there's really limited room to navigate. I feel it currently at the VA. I definitely have some conflict of what it means to be affiliated with that larger organization, given a lot of recent news. And I feel really fortunate to be in a VA system where there's a lot more room and flexibility that I think characterizes the organization on a national level. But even within that, find myself kind of coming up against the system and doing what I can to exist and try to implement good within kind of the inherent constraints there. And so I think I go to that place of wanting to think that way and act that way within this larger organizational system, and there's something in me that it's exhausting. It feels like us against them, but then it's us against us. I have a real reaction, I guess, to what it means to negotiate that tension with our people, and the people who it seems like we should be collaborating with and sharing this viewpoint, sharing this worldview, sharing this kind of larger drive. So I really don't have anything so well thought out. I don't have kind of the golden egg solution. I guess speaking as an early career psychologist whose training is ending and I'm preparing now to kind of enter the larger force, I don't really know what this means. I don't know what it means to me. I don't know where I'll go. I don't know where the organization will go. It's helpful to hear about that email that Division 39 sent out, because a big thing that comes up for me is exactly what they're articulating. A lot of the people who share this perspective have left. And so who's left in the organization? And while there's part of me that's saying, well, that's a great idea, people should go back, it also feels to me like, as someone who's just entering this field who had no involvement or awareness when everything was happening, do I really want to affiliate with this? Do I want to link my name to this? What's the drive to do that?
I hope that there's room for change. I'm glad that there's a dialogue about it. I think it's pretty jarring that something so horrific had to lead to the dialogue, that it took this much. Not just the torture happening, not just the collusion happening, but this entire report was what it took for APA to take more of a vocal stance. That's concerning to me, but my hope would be that there could be enough organizational shift that it would become more appealing to draw people back in. I don't know how feasible that is, and I don't know what that would look like. So I guess those are my kind of ramblings as someone looking at it, yeah, and not knowing how to partake in it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Dennis.
Yeah, I first heard about all of this I think it was EPA. It was 2013, and I was in the graduate school application process, so my memory is understandably hazy about it. But I went to a session, and I'm pretty sure it was at APA in New York in 2013, and they talked about it because I saw it in the program, and I was like, well, this is in my wheelhouse. And what struck me initially was how little it resembled what I saw in my 6 years as an Army interrogator. I was part of the, I was military intelligence my entire career, but only from 2004 on was I officially an interrogator. But I was involved with human intelligence collection early in other capacities. So I saw kind of how things were in that early time of the war on terror and how nobody really knew what was going on. And I think that's definitely reflected in the Hoffman report, in that, you know, we didn't even start talking about it as a community with the government or outside of it until about 2002. And at that point, we already had people in Afghanistan conducting interrogations and being involved in human intelligence. And then nothing really definitive came out until well after we were involved in 2 wars. And having seen how even just Department of Defense policy evolved, nobody really knew what they were doing early on in the start of the war. And I think that's pretty well documented, and I think history is definitely going to bear that. There weren't much in the way of plans, especially long-term ones. And so, but then, you know, most of my time as an interrogator was when things had kind of settled down, and there was a much more codified and overseen interrogation system throughout the whole Department of Defense. And that system bears, like I said, it bears very little resemblance to what the Hoffman report kind of makes the entire process sound. And I see a lot of references in it to Guantanamo Bay, and I wonder too if the problems that came out of the APA's collusion with the Department of Defense were not necessarily systemic problems, but more problems in a very specific place. And even when I was going through the interrogator course in 2004, I would mention Guantanamo Bay because that's the most prominent interrogation facility probably in the world at this point. And all of my instructors were like, "You want nothing to do with it, nothing to do." And it was well known that was just, you know, that was Mordor. That was just a weird place that the rules didn't apply. And, you know, nobody would ever say that officially because that's not something you say officially. But there were so many interests and so many people watching and so many different places that you were getting pulled in different directions that it was impossible really to have a very coherent policy there. And I think that's probably where a lot of the problematic things happen. And also the other thing too is that there were an awful lot of rules in place when I came through in 2004. And so when I hear things about changing the definition of torture, and I think that was mentioned in the Hoffman report, but I don't think anything conclusive came out of it. The definition of torture that's applied according to the Detainee Treatment Act of 2005 is based off of the U.S. Constitution and the 5th, 8th, and 14th Amendment, as well as the reservations, reservations, observations, and something else about the UN Convention on Torture and so on. And when you look at that, we've actually, our reservations to it basically say that the federal definition of torture matches the UN Convention on Torture. So I don't necessarily see a loosening of the definition of torture, although the UN definition is somewhat vague. The fact of the matter is that torture is illegal, and it has always been illegal. And the thing that I keep hearing is in reference to the enhanced interrogation techniques. One, they were kind of a unicorn in the military interrogation system in that you always heard about them, but you always heard about them in like this. Well, in this other place, they get to do enhanced techniques. And nobody ever actually has seen it in person. So maybe they existed in Guantanamo Bay, and for certain the CIA was able to do stuff like that, but the CIA always kind of had their own playbook. And as you can tell, they didn't participate in the Hoffman report, or really they don't really like to talk to anybody when it is a critical voice. So I think my concern with the Hoffman report was that it really mischaracterized the whole of military interrogations, because then, and Dr. Boulanger, you asked an excellent question, is can you be ethical and effective? And I will posit that you can, and to do so, you follow the laws that we've put out. And one of the things that the Detainee Treatment Act also says is that basically the playbook for all Department of Defense interrogations, and then the Obama administration further said, CIA, you are going to follow these rules too, comes out in the Human Intelligence Collection Manual, and it's FM 21-20.3, I think it is, and it basically says there are 17, it was 18 when I went through the schoolhouse and then changed to 17, approved interrogation approach techniques that you can use. There are a few other ones that can be done with certain justifications, but you're never going to get approval for those. And and if you follow those guidelines, it isn't torture. And none of those guidelines include waterboarding or sleep deprivation. Like, all of those are explicitly banned. And so I think you can be effective as an interrogator and be ethical, as long as you follow the rules. And it's not, and the rules they're not vague. At some of the policy levels it's vague, but I think if you actually look in the manual, it's pretty clear and says this is how you can talk to a detainee, this is how you cannot talk to a detainee. And it also even has a proviso in there that says, would you approve of the enemy treating your friends this way? And if you say that you would have a problem with the enemy interrogating your friends that way, then that is not the way to go. And that's in the Human Intelligence Collection. And on top of that, the whole just following orders thing, the Nuremberg defense isn't a defense. And that's one of the first things you're taught as a private and basic training, is that you follow lawful orders. And if you're asked to do an unlawful act, then you're just as culpable as the person giving you the order. And the fact of the matter is that torture is illegal. And we had a 2-day law land warfare class in the interrogator course that said, here are the things that you can and can't do. Here's how you can represent yourself. You can't pretend to be clergy. You can't pretend to be Red Cross. You can't do this and you can't do that. And it was a lot of these are prescribed behaviors, and that included things like waterboarding and sleep deprivation, and a lot of the things that you hear about in the enhanced interrogation techniques. And if you follow the news, a lot of the news about the interrogation techniques was the Bush administration's lawyers basically trying to justify them. So I don't think in some ways it is an ethical issue in that we do need to think about this as a career field. But I think a lot of the problems in the Hoffman report are not necessarily, I think a lot of those are, it's more of a criminal issue than an ethical issue in some ways, because it's people basically trying to get around the law. And, which I guess is an ethical issue in and of itself. But, and so, you know, what I'm trying to say is that yes, you can be an ethical interrogator, you can be an effective interrogator. And I think I was, you know, I've conducted a little less than 500 interrogations myself. I've supervised close to 3,000. And I've been part of the process from 2004 all the way to 2010 at a number of different levels. You know, to include very high level ones. My first job was the Bin Laden task force. So I mean, my reports were getting briefed to Secretary Rumsfeld and the president in some cases. And some of my detainees with other ones have been on the cover of the New York Times. So it's not even just the high levels are playing by different rules, and it's really some places have different rules. And that place was Guantanamo Bay, which, again, I think the Mordor description is apt. And so, you know, I think you can be ethical and effective as long as you follow the rules, and the rules are very plain to see. And then I guess what the professional and personal implications of it are is that, well, the ethical behavior is important because we've seen what the effects of unethical behavior on, you know, for interrogation policy on operations. Abu Ghraib basically removed any sense that the US had any kind of moral authority in Iraq. You know, we were definitely seen as liberators, and it was so positive during the invasion, and they were very happy to see us. You know, we get a lot of, you know, kids who the only words in English they knew were Bush good, Saddam donkey, and like people were really happy, and then the highly detailed Bush administration plan kicked into order, and the city descended, or the country descended into lawlessness, and then again we have Abu Ghraib happening. And Abu Ghraib was really the result of poor training and even worse oversight. And that was one of the big things that came out of it. And that's one of the things that came out of the Detainee Treatment Act of 2005. And I think that's one of the things that I don't hear about in the Hoffman report. They hint at it, and the case book would have been an outstanding thing to do. But I think what we need is to stay involved in the interrogation process. Maybe we need to look at exactly what the roles are, because the dual role is problematic. But as long as there is oversight, and as long as there is proper training, again, we can be ethical and effective. And that dual role is problematic. And I think that they've come a long way by creating the biscuits, the behavioral science consultation teams. Yeah, I only ever knew them as biscuits. I didn't know what they stood for until I read the Hoffman report. But the biscuits are actually not allowed to do healthcare, because they found that in our laws of land warfare, not even talking about the Geneva Conventions, and it says it in 2120.3 that medical personnel are not supposed to be involved in the collection of information. And I think that's important that we maintain mental health personnel on the detainee, not on the intelligence side of the puzzle, but on the detainee operations side of the puzzle. And I can tell you a story about why it's important that we stay involved in this. There was a detainee in one of the countries I was deployed to who was involved high level with a lot of people, but he was off. And we would start to get weird things in the booth, and like, guys are like, what's going on with this guy? And we had a psychologist attached to our task force who never said this is how you interrogate people, but he was there to ensure that, just like our medical personnel, the detainees were mentally able to be interrogated. And so he said, I'm gonna, you know, he would be in our shift change meetings, and we're talking about this guy, and he's like, I'm going to talk to him tomorrow morning, and I'm not gonna sign on, like, you guys can't go see him until I talk to him. And so we paused the interrogations, because at that place we did 2-a-day interrogations. So he didn't get seen that night. And that morning, the psychologist went in and basically said, this detainee is no longer fit for interrogation. And then, so all operations with him stopped. And, he was transferred to a different facility that had better healthcare than our facility did. And that was good for him, because he was, basically now I can look at it, through my training now, but in 2005 I didn't know this, was that, he was having a psychotic breakdown. And part of it was because he was already completely unhinged, because when you got his history, he was already on the verge of it to begin with, and then it was just the detention that pushed him over the edge. So we need to be there to be able to put the stops on these, because I can assure you that your interrogators are not, one, trained to recognize that, and two, that's not their interest. Their interest is getting information, whereas our interest is, the welfare of our patients. And I think by saying that we're not allowed anywhere near interrogation operations, I think we are one, removing an important check on the process, and two, shortchanging our detainees, and also putting our interrogators in a position without our oversight to potentially commit unethical acts that will cause even more problems, I think, for operations. So, and as far as what to do next, I think anybody who got the email from the EPA, who's got a dog in this hunt that doesn't submit something for how to revise the ethics thing, if you at all care about it, you need to give your feedback to it. But then also, it was something that I've talked to Chris Moran here at Adelphi about. The first day of class, we do the psychologist's oath that Gordon Durner wrote, I think. And it was historically just a symbolic, like, welcome to Durner, now you're gonna read this oath thing. But I came from a culture where everything has a creed. There's the soldier's creed, there's the airborne creed, there's the military intelligence creed. All of these creeds that are basically a code of behavior. Things like in the soldier's creed, it's, I will always place the mission first, I will never quit, I will never leave a soldier behind, things like that. And those are important, because those are the things that basically operate as a North Star for us. And when we have to, there's always, like, when you don't know what to do when it's an ethical question, in the military we can always look to those creeds to give us guidance. And I think if APA would adopt something like a psychologist's oath, kind of like the medical profession is the Hippocratic Oath, I think that's important, because a code of ethics is what, I don't know how long the APA code of ethics was, like 85 pages or something like that, and it's written in legal terms, and give us a paragraph that says, we're going to do no harm, we're going to place these things first, this is what right is. That goes a long way, and I think that's something that we as a career need to think about.